When racist right-wing warmongers are clamoring for yet another war, it comes as no surprise. There's always another war they want to drag the rest of the world into. We have to speak up against it and stand up to it. But when the left starts clamoring for the same wars, this is when we are in real trouble. This means a consensus has been reached, voices of reason have been silenced or sidelined, and we are on a march toward war that is almost irreversible. And this is where we are right now with China. I just came across a video by Breaking Points. This is Krystal and Saagar, who I thought I had a pretty high opinion of. And I thought that this would be one of the last places I would look and see them trying to help tee up a war with China. And yet that is exactly what I have found. Now, the title of this video is Jacob Helberg, How We Avoid War with China Over Taiwan. And let's just go through this and break this down. And let's find out why this is so dangerous, why people in the progressive left also joining in and supporting this narrative, why this is so dangerous, and why this is such an urgent warning sign. Let's start watching.
Joining us now is Jacob Helberg. He's the author of The Wires of War, Technology and the Global Struggle for Power. Excellent book. We previously had a great conversation. I wanted to make sure that you could come over here to Breaking Points and discuss. This book is all about a struggle for war and technology, and specifically about the U.S. and China. Jacob, give us a little bit of a preview of this.
Okay, so that was an incomplete introduction. Who is Jacob Helberg actually? And I'm going to show you who Jacob Helberg is actually, and it took me literally less than 1 minute to figure all of this out. So this is who Jacob Helberg is. He's an adjunct fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. This is funded by governments like Japan, Taiwan, and the United States, as well as defense corporations, arms manufacturers like Northrop Grumman, but also big oil, big finance. There's Boeing, Exxon, General Atomics. They make the drones that are out there killing innocent people from North Africa to Central Asia. There's also Lockheed Martin, the F-35, $1 trillion weapons program. $1 trillion, the U.S. couldn't think of anything else better to do with. $1 trillion to Lockheed Martin. You have BP, Bechtel, Citigroup, General Dynamics. They make the main battle tanks for the United States, the M1A1 and now M1A2. You also have Raytheon. They are the ones making the missiles. And BAE, this is really interesting. BAE, the AUKUS alliance, was basically announced at the same time as this massive major nuclear-powered submarine deal with Australia. And it's BAE that's going to be one of the corporations involved in making and delivering those submarines. And so that's what you have here. Actually, as a matter of fact, when you look through this list of giant corrupt corporations spanning finance, the arms industry, big pharma, these are the corporations that have created this insurmountable barrier between the American people and the things that they want, deserve, and should have. Things like universal health care, or affordable housing and education, or a reprieve from endless war. These are the corporations responsible for putting that barrier in between the American people and these things that they want. Things that I thought Breaking Points stood for and promoted. And yet here they are putting another brick on that barrier between the people and these things, making it that much harder to get over and to get to those things. Let's continue listening.
Of this in the context of...
And with Taiwan, you have a situation that has been at the epicenter of gray zone conflict and what I call the gray war. And unfortunately, we're now reaching a point where it could potentially turn into a hot war.
So the immediate thing that we got from listeners as they were looking at the news about Xi Jinping saying that the Taiwan and China, mainland China, were reunified, people are desperately afraid right now. Like,
why are they desperately afraid? They're desperately afraid because no one is telling them the truth about what's going on between mainland China and Taiwan. Nobody is telling them the truth that Taiwan is recognized as part of China by virtually every nation on Earth, including every AUKUS member, Australia, the UK, and the US. And as a matter of fact, in that order, let's take a look at what each one of them says about Taiwan. So this is from the official Australian government website, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Australia-Taiwan relationship. The Australian government continued to recognize Taipei, that's in Taiwan, until the establishment of diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China in 1972, PRC. Australia's joint communique with the PRC recognized the government of the PRC as China's sole legal government and acknowledged the position of the PRC that Taiwan was a province of the PRC. And I don't understand why that is so hard for people to understand. That means Taiwan is part of China. They only recognize one government ruling over China. That is the government in Beijing right now, not in Taipei. And to help illustrate this reality, this wasn't just some old document, or this is the current Australian government's official website. And if you look for the embassy in Taiwan, if you're laboring under the delusion that it is a real country, welcome to the Australian office, Taipei. It's an office. It's not an embassy. It's not even a consulate. It's an office, because the Australian government does not recognize the government in Taiwan as a government over a sovereign nation. There is only one China. Taiwan is part of it. And there is only one government that rules over China, and that is the government of the People's Republic of China in Beijing, not Taipei. It's right in front of you. The truth of this is right in front of you, which is what makes this lie about China bullying Taiwan the dumbest lie so far in the 21st century, the dumbest lie so far the West and their media have tried to use to sell a war to the public. With weapons of mass destruction, everyone knew it was a lie because there was no evidence. The evidence was not compelling, and people knew they were being lied to. They said, if it was true, why don't you have compelling evidence for this? And then they went into Iraq, and there was no weapons of mass destruction. And now we all admit in retrospect that it was a deliberate lie to sell war to the public. This is not a lie like that. This is worse, because you can just go to the Australian government's official website, or you could come over here to UK Parliament, House of Commons Library, History and Domestic Politics. And let's look for one China right here, relations with China. The PRC maintains that mainland China and Taiwan are parts of one China whose sovereignty cannot be divided. Relations with the UK. The UK, like most other countries, does not recognize Taiwan nor maintain formal diplomatic relations with the island. The UK says that this dispute, Taiwan and the People's Republic of China, should be resolved through dialogue in line with the views of the people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. Has no plans to recognize Taiwan as a strait. The UK does support Taiwan's participation in international organizations as an observer. And the UK does not have an embassy or a consulate in Taiwan. They only have the British office, Taipei. What about the United States? The United States really pretends like Taiwan is some sort of independent country that China is bullying. Let's see what their stance is on Taiwan. U.S. relations with Taiwan, again, state.gov. This is the official U.S. Department of State website. U.S.-Taiwan relations. The United States and Taiwan enjoy a robust, unofficial relationship. The 1979 U.S. People's Republic of China joint communique switched diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing. In the joint communique, the United States recognized the government of the People's Republic of China as the sole legal government of China, acknowledging the Chinese position that there is but one China and Taiwan is part of China. And if you go and look for where the embassy is in China, the U.S. Embassy, where is it in China? It's here, it's in Beijing. And what do they have in Taiwan? They have the American Institute in Taiwan. Again, it's not an embassy, it's not even a consulate. It is the American Institute in Taiwan. It is like a de facto embassy or consulate, but not actually. That's why they call it the American Institute in Taiwan. And you would be surprised how many people in the United States or in the West in general know none of this, despite it being easily accessible on the government websites of all three countries of the AUKUS alliance. And what about Taiwan? Do they have embassies all over the place? No, they have things like this: Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office in the United States. Not an embassy because it's not a country. It's not recognized as a country. It is not a country. And Jacob Helberg, this representative of the military-industrial complex, he is going to admit it himself here. First he's going to tell you the lie, but then he's going to accidentally reveal the truth. And no one in Breaking Point's, no one in their audience is going to notice this, but let's listen.
What's just the temperature check when you're looking at the situation in Taiwan and how it relates to what you're writing about?
It's probably the most dire in our lifetimes. I don't think we've ever had a situation where we realistically face the scenario of an actual hot war between major powers that are nuclear powers nonetheless. I was born on the day of the fall of the Soviet Union, so I've never known that in my lifetime. The reason that we care about Taiwan and that it is actually a core interest of the United States is for four main reasons.
Okay, and he has to explain this because Taiwan and China are on the opposite side of the Pacific Ocean from the United States. They're located in a region of the world that the United States is not located in. They have to cross an entire ocean to get involved with China militarily. So this is why he has to explain why we need to do this. Just like every warmonger has tried to explain why we need to send troops to, say, Afghanistan or Iraq on the other side of the planet. So let's listen to him explain.
For computer chips, maritime trade routes, submarine cables, and precedent. The South China Sea is a major corridor for information infrastructure submarine cables, which carries the bulk of information that connects North America and the Indo-Pacific. Allowing China to take control of that, it would be a huge setback to American national security, to intellectual property, to the sovereignty of a lot of countries in that region for reasons that I detail in the book. Obviously, an enormous amount of supply of computer chips get made in fabs that are in Taiwan by TSMC. And as I explained in the book, allowing China to control that would jeopardize our access to chips and also the integrity of the chips themselves.
So he's talking about resources and infrastructure located on the other side of the Pacific that he feels the United States is entitled to exploit and control, regardless of what the people in the actual region living there think or feel, regardless of how they think and feel.
Maritime trade route is another major issue. And the last is
Okay, and maritime trade routes, we've gone over this many times. Those trade routes are being used by who? Primarily China. And they have admitted this. The warmongers, these think tanks, these corporate-funded think tanks, in paper after paper have admitted that these are trade routes China uses to bring in hydrocarbons and uses for exports and imports, and they're essential for the US to control, because if they ever want to strangle China's economy, they need to be able to shut those trade routes down. So it's actually the United States desperate to have the ability to disrupt trade, and that's what's driving this. And yet they're claiming they're there to protect the trade routes from China, who depends on them, from China disrupting them, trade routes that China depends on. It's always projection, and it's always turning every part of the narrative 180 degrees around.
Precedent, and this has been a very thorny topic in the foreign policy community, but setting the precedent of allowing China to annex a democratic country like Taiwan is...
Okay, he just said Taiwan is a democratic country. Just make a note of it. He's claiming it's a democratic country. We just looked at in black and white what the official positions are of the A in AUKUS, Australia, the UK in AUKUS, the UK, and the US. We just saw what their official positions were. Taiwan is not a country. It is part of China. There's only one government, and it resides in Beijing. And so he's calling it a democratic country. This is a lie. It's the dumbest lie yet, being told over and over again to the American people as to why we need to intervene. This because China's going to annex a democratic country. It's already recognized as part of China.
Is a really, really bad precedent to set. That is basically giving Russia the green light to invade Ukraine. It's letting China know that it can basically move forward and annex other parts of its disputed territories, like the Senkaku Islands. China has disputed territories with 17 countries.
Throughout this war propaganda that he's spewing, he's omitting the fact that the only actual country invading other countries right now, and also occupying countries right now, right at this moment, they have military forces in Syria and Iraq. In Iraq, they've been there for almost 20 years now. And in Syria, they illegally occupy and hold eastern Syria. And they have specifically said they're doing it to deprive the Syrian economy of food and energy, to basically starve and freeze the people to death. That this is what they said they're doing. And this is what they're doing openly on the global stage. And they're saying, we need to intervene in regards to Taiwan to stop China from getting Taiwan and then setting a precedent where it might invade other countries, when the US is the only country right now on the global stage doing this, of course, side by side with their allies, UK and Australia, for example. But this is the argument that they're actually trying to make, and people are dumb enough to believe this. And I expect people to do that because the media keeps people incredibly ignorant, especially in the West. But I did not expect Krystal and Saagar to buy into this. Well, Krystal's not there, so I'll give her benefit of the doubt. But Saagar is, you'll watch, he's going to go along with it, and so is his co-host.
So there is a lot at play, and I think it would be in the interest of everyone in the region to make sure that precedent isn't set.
Yeah, you know, Jacob, I can already hear the comment section, people are saying, oh, you know, the military-industrial complex wants war with China. This is something that, you know, you're an arm of that, you're just pushing that, all of that. Why should people care?
Okay, and remember, this is after Saagar skipped in the introduction mentioning that he's with CSIS and who funds them, and that he actually is someone from the military-industrial complex pitching a war, yet another war based on an absolute lie. And we just went over how he is lying about Taiwan being a democratic country. It is not. It is recognized as part of China by all of these countries warmongering against China.
If you're a normal person, let's take the money out of it. Why should people care about any of this?
I'm so happy you bring that up because let's remember that we got to this place because we have had a policy of engagement towards China, and we've operated on the assumption that engaging with them and, you know, giving them the benefit of the doubt and giving them a pass every time they haven't lived up to their international commitments would actually buy us goodwill and would buy us good behavior.
So he's talking about the U.S. training China to demonstrate good behavior. Again, the United States responsible for the absolute worst crimes against humanity of the 21st century. Even the things in their wildest imagination that they have accused China of, even if they were real, which they aren't, would not even come close to what the U.S. has openly done on the global stage. What they did to Iraq alone, it wouldn't even compare with. And so he's talking about we need to train China to demonstrate good behavior, and they haven't been. So this is why everyone in the world should care about the U.S. teaching China a lesson to get in line and subordinate itself to the U.S. So let's continue listening.
And it hasn't. And, you know, the old saying that we are confronted with China with a pattern of behavior that is completely at variance with our own. This is an
What does that mean? Does anyone understand what that means? In reality, it means China is not invading other countries. They are not coercing other countries. They do not have an endowment set up specifically to interfere inside the political affairs of other countries in complete violation to the UN Charter. China is not doing any of these things. He cannot demonstrate that China is doing any of these things, and yet the US is doing absolutely all of these things, and on an unprecedented scale. Let's continue listening.
An autocratic regime that operates very, very differently from democratic systems that we're used to at home. At the end,
Did you hear that? Democratic systems we're used to at home. These are democratic systems we're used to at home, say in the United States, where you vote in politician after politician after politician to end endless wars, to give universal health care, to provide affordable housing, to provide affordable education, and they deliver none of these things. And so you wait 4 years for another chance to vote. You vote in another representative, and he does the exact same thing. He ignores what you want, and he does what these people want. And that is how the democratic processes back at home that we're used to, that is how they work. Conversely, China, this autocratic system, has provided the Chinese people with health care, affordable housing, affordable education, and infrastructure that has already by far surpassed that in the United States. China has the largest high-speed rail network on Earth in human history. The United States doesn't have a single mile of high-speed rail in their country, not even 1 mile, and they never will. Not anytime in the foreseeable future. So this is Jacob Helberg imagining that people are still buying into this, even though when they go out their door, if you live in the United States, you go out your door, and the evidence contradicting what Jacob Helberg is saying is looking them in the face. And if you go to China, the evidence will be everywhere you look that Jacob Helberg is lying, that it's an autocratic regime, that the people are being oppressed and deprived, when in reality, it's the exact opposite.
At the end of the day, what you're seeing is the behavior habits of Xi Jinping at home are being mirrored abroad, and deterrence works. And it's worked throughout history. And as Michelle Flournoy pointed out, it is the erosion of American deterrence in the Asia Pacific that is actually inviting the kind of aggressive behavior that could actually culminate in a war, not the other way around.
I'm really glad you...
A war between who? A war between who? A war between China and the US, who doesn't belong in the region in the first place. It's not located in the region, so why is its military in the region? Why do they have tens of thousands of troops in the region? They have tens of thousands of troops in Japan and South Korea. They have been coercing the Philippines to allow them to establish a larger military presence there, and their ships are constantly plying the waters of the South China Sea, and they are going through the strait between Taiwan and the mainland. They are doing this. Oh, and by the way, now everyone is aware of U.S. Marines being on Taiwan itself. The United States government officially recognizes Taiwan as Chinese territory, and they have de facto occupied part of Chinese territory with U.S. Marines there training the Taiwanese military so that they can provoke this conflict. And he's acting as if we need a deterrent against China doing bad things in the region, or there might be a war between China and the U.S. that doesn't even belong in the region. It is just so tone deaf. It's so tone deaf of what the U.S., the injustice that has been doing all around the globe, and acting as if anyone tilting the balance at all in favor of denying the U.S. impunity to just do whatever it wants, wherever it wants, somehow that's a problem that needs to be solved. His sponsors, of course, definitely see the world that way, but they're trying to convince the rest of the world that we should think that way too.
Glad you hit that, because people should...
Yeah. I'm glad that you hit that point. I'm not going to challenge you on that at all. I'm glad you hit that point, because I'm going to just buttress everything that you just said. Listen to this guy.
The cliche is that, it doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. But when we're looking at the rhetoric that people are engaging in, people will often say things like, well, actually placing backing for Taiwan will actually increase the chances of war. But if you look at the 1930s, it was the lack of commitment to democratic countries. It was actually a lack of commitment to the idea that we would defend territorial integrity. That
he's acting like the last time any country carried out a campaign of military aggression was the 1930s, as if he just woke up from a coma. He's like Captain America. His plane went down in the Arctic, he was frozen, and someone just woke him up. And he doesn't realize that the U.S. has been the worst aggressor of this entire century. Country after country after country. Name one country China has invaded in the 21st century. Just name one. You can't. What about the United States? When you type into Google U.S. invasion of, and you see like an endless list of countries that it has invaded as possible guesses of what you're going to type next, that's when you should wake up and realize there's something wrong with this narrative. And I honestly, again, Breaking Points was the last place I expected to see this.
That actually increase the chances of war. Once again, situations are going to differ, but it's important to look at how these things are not just as simple as pro-peace, anti-war. But the question I'd ask...
So they have to say that. When you hear people arguing nuance, everything is nuanced. You can't just be anti-war. It's nuanced. There's nuanced reasons why we should do this war, even though every other war was unjust and based on lies. This one's different and it's nuanced. When you hear people arguing nuance, it's because the lie is so obvious and they need to cloud the water as much as possible to try to sell it to you, to try to slip it past you.
Ask for you is, what drives Xi Jinping to take the approach that he's taking? Because what I don't quite understand is, if you want to reunify from their perspective China, you want to have Hong Kong, you want to have Taiwan by 2049, the 100th anniversary of the CCP's takeover of the country, why don't you just prove that China's a good model and the Taiwanese people would want to actually join, rather than just trying to take things by force?
Well, Xi Jinping is 68 years old, so the window in his personal life to make this part of his legacy is finite. He doesn't have forever. He also sees that window narrowing for strategic reasons in the region. American allies in the region, like Japan, Australia, just to name a few.
Actually, those are the only two. He can't name anymore because there are no more. All of the countries that people like Jacob Helberg are trying to convince you are being tormented by China, including all throughout Southeast Asia, they are not interested in this. This is why they haven't joined any sort of US-led NATO of Southeast Asia. They're not interested in it. This is why the US is funding opposition groups all over Southeast Asia to put pressure on the governments here who want to work with China, not against China. And so they've got these opposition groups trying to overthrow these governments, worm their way into power, and then cut their risks economically and diplomatically in relation to China so that the US can prevent China from surpassing America economically and militarily. And so America can maintain hegemony over a region it's not even located on the map. This is what they're trying to sell you.
Few are actually starting to coalesce on a counter-China agenda. They would never call it that, of course, but that's basically what it is. A lot of countries are growing very, very skeptical and concerned about Chinese behavior in the region, and they're starting to come on board on America's agenda to address that behavior in the region. So Xi Jinping is looking at a situation where 10 or 15 years from now, he could actually find himself.
It's interesting that he says 10 to 15 years, because that is exactly the amount of time that is left for the US to stop China before it irreversibly surpasses the US economically and militarily. And so what he's doing, he's turning it all around like it's China that's running out of time, not the US. And you could see in this region that nobody is buying into this. No one is interested in the US-led crusade against China. And so it's the US racing against time to pull off any sort of military conflict that it needs to fight before that window of opportunity closes and China is militarily stronger than the US and would be able to easily defeat any sort of US aggression in the region. Right now, they still have a chance. In 10 to 15 years, the US will have no chance. So this is what he's talking about, but he's completely twisting it around.
In a region that has a much more unified front vis-a-vis China than it is currently. And he's also looking at a situation where the current vice president of Taiwan, who could potentially be the next president of Taiwan, has outwardly supported independence.
Okay, so how can a democratic country that we need to defend because China is going to take it over, how can it declare independence? What are they declaring independence from if they're already a democratic country, according to Jacob Helberg? So he's telling you two stories that can't possibly be true at the same time because he's a liar, because he's omitting the official position of the US government in regards to Taiwan, that it is part of China, and that there's only one recognized government of China, which is in Beijing. He's going to completely omit that and tell you this is the WMD lie that they are telling you. And yet this is the dumbest lie yet, because you could just go to the State Department's official website I mean, it's literally US-Taiwan relations, and the first paragraph completely explains the US position without any sort of ambiguity that it's part of China and they don't officially recognize the government. And yet he's trying to sell a war with China, a nuclear-armed nation, thousands of miles away from American shores. He's trying to sell you a war to defend Taiwan when it's not even a country, and he just admitted that it isn't because they need to declare independence first. It's just totally absurd. Again, he's doing this on breaking points, and there's zero pushback.
And so that is something that is really scary for China, because it's potentially a signal that Taiwanese politics are trending in a more pro-independence direction.
You see, and this is where I think it all becomes very important, which is that, as we see, I just saw this morning across the wire, the Chinese are practicing beach landing drills in the province across from Taiwan. They've penetrated some, not necessarily the airspace, but the air defense zone, which obviously is always in dispute whenever countries say stuff like that.
Again, there's no dispute. ADIZs are established in international airspace. China was flying in international airspace. If Taiwan had its own sovereign airspace, those planes were not even close to it. So again, this is, for some reason, breaking points, helping grease the skids of this war propaganda. And they're doing it with this Jacob Helberg, who is a representative of the military-industrial complex. It's surreal. I can't even believe what I'm seeing here.
All of this points to what could be an unstable China that sees what happened. The world blames them for COVID, as they should, and they see.
Again, what was that? The world should blame China for COVID. So what are you telling me? That China was responsible for the first case that arrived in the United States and America's failure to identify it, isolate it, contain it, and stop its spread across the rest of the country. China's responsible for what was going on inside the US, their inability to control it. So something obvious, I missed something. Something happened with Saagar since the last time I've seen him. Something obviously happened to him where a screw came loose.
See this as a reason in order to move forward. So Jacob, nobody wants war with Taiwan. It will be a disaster. And regardless of whether it even comes to that or not, what can we do right now in the year 2021 to avoid what would be a catastrophic outcome for the US, for Taiwan, and for China?
So Xi Jinping has made his intention of unification very, very clear. So then the question is, what do we do about it? Do we want Taiwan to, the two scenarios that we have to avoid a war is scenario number one, we just let him take the island, or scenario number two, we prevent him from taking the island in the first place. We prevent him from trying to carry out an attempt to invade the island in the first place.
Or option three, uphold the one China policy, allow the mainland and Taiwan to integrate over due time. If you look at what's going on with Taiwan economically, its entire economy is dependent on the mainland. I mean, it is already integrating with the mainland, and as time goes by, this process is only going to accelerate. Saying that we either let China take Taiwan when we already acknowledge that it's part of China, or we have to stop China from taking Taiwan. These are not options. These are not options as the US agreed with Beijing regarding the status of Taiwan. This is a complete violation. This is the US backtracking on its word, which shouldn't surprise anyone, but it just goes to show you who's creating the problem here, and it's not Beijing.
If you want to pursue the latter, the question really boils down to how do you configure the map of the region in a way where his calculation changes? And I think the presence of, a lot of this boils down to who's going to blink first. We dread the idea of waging war on China, but China dreads the idea of waging war on the US. So the question is, who's going to wage war on who? And if you have US troops that are already on the island, the ball is in China's camps. If we have no presence there, the ball is in our camp because China's going to invade, and then we're going to have to decide whether or not we're going to send people there. The recent reports that that we actually do have a small presence that has been secretly helping train the Taiwanese forces is actually kind of good news, because you're seeing an interesting reaction by Beijing, where it's basically urging the U.S. to withdraw, because it knows that if the U.S. is already there, the decision to invade becomes much, much more complicated.
So we just heard them explaining how China is this horrible, aggressive, expansionist power, and then they're admitting that now they got U.S. troops in yet another part of the world, thousands of miles from their own shores, and actually just right off the coast of mainland China. And we're supposed to believe that it's China creating the problem here and not the United States, especially since the U.S. official position is that the People's Republic of China is the sole legal government of China, and acknowledged the Chinese position that there is but one China and Taiwan is part of China, meaning that those U.S. troops are de facto occupying Chinese territory, recognized by the United States as Chinese territory. And so this was a major provocation by who? By China? No, by the United States. And Jacob Helberg is allowed to just spew this nonsense on breaking points, and there's zero pushback. There's just constant nodding in agreement.
I wrote a piece about decentralizing deterrence that's basically about how one.
Okay, so what's he going to do now? He's going to do the sales pitch, because you just saw who sponsors him. So listen to the sales pitch. Listen to it.
One of the best, most effective ways to restore deterrence is by substantially bolstering the armament and defense apparatus of our allies, so that so that the weight and the burden of defense doesn't entirely all rest on our shoulders. And that was the model that we carried out during World War II. I mean, we were the arsenal of democracy, but through the Lend-Lease program and through a lot of other programs, we actually armed our allies. It was a very effective model, and I think that there's something to be said about carrying out a modern-day approach version of that.
So selling billions upon billions of dollars of weapons from companies that sponsor the think tank that I'm an adjunct fellow at. That's what my solution is. Surprise, no conflict of interest, no ulterior motive here, and Breaking Points just has this guy on and just allows him free reign to just say whatever he wants, and they're reinforcing this narrative in the minds of anyone in their audience that doesn't see through this, which apparently are a lot of people. Disappointingly, a lot of people were buying it. I was looking through the comments. I don't think that they're deleting comments, so it just seems like here we go again. We're on the left as well as on the right. The right doesn't surprise me that they're racist warmongers, but it surprises me that on the left you have people like Jacob Helberg, who can find a very comfortable perch to land on and sing his song and sell his weapons for his sponsors at his think tank, CSIS. I just showed you the list: Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed, General Dynamics, General Atomics. It's just obscene. And to watch Breaking Points do this, unless something happened where they changed and I missed it, I'm totally shocked to see this kind of war propaganda being enabled by them.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Jacob, we really appreciate you joining us. Thank you. I think the book is excellent and people should buy it. We'll have a link down there in the description. Go ahead, Mark.
So this is Breaking Points bringing on a warmonger who belongs to a think tank funded by arms manufacturers. This is them saying these are really good points. I'm totally agreeing with him, not pushing back at all. And so what does this do? What does this ultimately do? What did this ultimately do when people did this ahead of the Iraq invasion in 2003? It helped justify and it helped enable a war that killed 1 million people. Those are real people that died. Those are people who had dreams and aspirations for the future that are dead now. And a region of the planet that is still to this day, 20 years later, destabilized and in chaos, where people's lives are endangered, where people's lives are put on hold while they try to get their country back together because of a war sold by lies, told by people exactly like Jacob Helberg, and enabled by people like Saagar and his co-host there on Breaking Points. It's always at this point where it becomes almost irreversible that we're on our way to war. So just be on notice if you're a Breaking Points fan or you're hearing this same sort of narrative coming from the left. I'm helping people see through it. Try to raise the alarm. I know that it seems pointless or futile, but just try anyway, because what else can you do? If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. Helps the channel grow. I have a website, newatlas.report. There are no ads. There is no paywall. There never will be. All of my work is there. I'm not on social media, so you can find and follow all my work there. In the video description below, all of these links that I was using to expose their lies, it will be in the video description below. You can check it out for yourself. Unlike them, they don't post any information at all. Not his CSIS profile. I do. It'll be there and you can check it out. There's also ways you can help support my work, and everyone who is supporting my work, whether it's through Patreon, month-to-month, one-time donations, or just liking and sharing my work, I could not do this work without that support. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.